There exists in the human psyche certain archetypal patterns that shape the way a life unfolds. Just as the eternal boy, the pure eterness, haunts many men, so too there exists the eternal girl, a figure who resists maturation, who clings to innocence, fantasy, and the promise of a life not yet fully lived. This is not merely immaturity, nor is it simply a refusal to take responsibility. Rather, it is a psychological condition, an attachment to the archetype of eternal youth, which can both enchant and imprison. The eternal girl appears charming, spontaneous, even radiant. She embodies vitality, freshness, and possibility, but beneath this allure lies a shadow. For when one remains bound to the archetype of eternal youth, one avoids the demands of real adulthood, the confrontation with limitation, the acceptance of responsibility, the endurance of suffering, and the creation of authentic meaning. Without this maturation, life becomes a cycle of beginnings without follow-through, of dreams without grounding, of relationships without depth. We must not condemn the eternal girl, rather, we must understand her. For she emerges when the burden of reality seems too heavy, when the confrontation with the shadow is too painful, when the soul longs for perpetual escape into fantasy. In this sense, the eternal girl is not merely weakness but a strategy of survival. The tragedy is that what protects her also imprisons her. The archetype offers shelter from pain but denies her the fullness of life. The task of psychological growth is to recognize this archetype within and to gradually integrate it, so that the vitality of the eternal girl is not lost but transformed. To grow up is not to abandon youth but to balance it with maturity. It is to bring innocence into relationship with responsibility, playfulness into dialogue with commitment, imagination into harmony with reality. Only then can the eternal girl become a whole woman. ChatGPT said, "The figure of the eternal girl is not simply a matter of behavior, immaturity, or cultural conditioning, but something deeper, an archetype that arises from the collective unconscious." In Jungian psychology, archetypes are universal patterns, timeless images that shape human thought and behavior across cultures. Just as the archetype of the eternal boy, the pure eterness, manifests in many men who resist adulthood, the eternal girl lives within many women as a psychic force. She is not bound to a single individual but is an image, an energy, a symbol that can possess a life if left unrecognized. The eternal girl embodies the qualities of youth, lightness, spontaneity, charm, a sense of unbounded possibility. She resists the weight of the world's demands and finds refuge in the freshness of beginnings. She thrives in the promise of what could be, rather than the reality of what is. On the surface, this may seem like vitality, even creativity, for she often brings brightness and a childlike wonder to life. Yet, beneath this radiance lies her greatest challenge. She is bound to an archetypal pattern that fears growth, responsibility, and confrontation with life's inevitable limitations. Unlike a mere phase of adolescence, the eternal girl is not confined to youth itself. A woman may be chronologically 40 or 50 and still be inwardly governed by this archetype. She may continue to idealize relationships, seeking partners who rescue rather than challenge her. She may chase dreams without grounding them in concrete reality. She may avoid suffering or conflict, believing life should remain enchanted and effortless. In this sense, the eternal girl is not about age, but about orientation to life. Archetypes have both light and shadow, and the eternal girl is no exception. Her light is her capacity for play, her openness, her refusal to be hardened by cynicism. These qualities are precious, for they prevent the soul from becoming stagnant or overly rigid. Yet her shadow lies in her refusal to step beyond this stage of innocence. By avoiding maturity, she avoids depth. By refusing to encounter her shadow, she denies wholeness. What she gains in charm, she loses in substance. What she avoids in pain, she pays for in fragmentation. This archetypal pattern is powerful precisely because it feels natural to the one possessed by it. The eternal girl often does not recognize herself as trapped. She believes she is merely protecting her freedom, when in truth she may be bound by fear. Fear of responsibility, fear of disillusionment, fear of losing the lightness of youth. But as Jung observed, what we do not make conscious controls us from the shadows. The eternal girl, when unexamined, becomes a hidden ruler over life choices, perpetuating cycles of avoidance and repetition. To recognize the eternal girl as an archetype is already the beginning of transformation. For when one names a pattern, one gains a degree of distance from it. The eternal girl can then be seen for what she is, not an enemy, but an inner figure whose vitality must be integrated rather than obeyed blindly. She is a symbol of youth eternal, but her true purpose is not to hold us captive in adolescence. It is to remind us that even as we mature, we must not lose the freshness, imagination, and wonder of the child within. The task is not to destroy her, but to place her in dialogue with the mature woman she resists becoming, so that life may grow into wholeness. The eternal girl, when she appears, rarely comes in the form of heaviness or burden. Rather, she is most often recognized by her lightness, her captivating spontaneity, her radiance that seems to promise infinite possibilities. There is something deeply alluring in her presence. She embodies freshness, vitality, and a refusal to be dulled by the ordinary. People are drawn to her not because of what she achieves, but because of what she evokes, a sense of youth that feels timeless, an openness that makes others believe life can still be magical. This charm is not merely superficial. It is an archetypal power that reaches into the collective psyche. She is playful, unpredictable, and often idealized by those who meet her. In her company, life can feel less heavy, less constrained. She may carry an aura of adventure, of being unbound by conventional limits. Her laughter disarms seriousness, her enthusiasm inspires, and her capacity to see life with new eyes creates a sense of possibility in those around her. She does not simply live. She embodies a way of being that resonates with others' hidden longings for freedom and escape from responsibility. This is why the eternal girl archetype is not easily dismissed. Her charm acts like a magnet, often masking the deeper struggles beneath. She creates a projection field, inviting others to place upon her their fantasies of rescue, romance, or salvation. Men may idealize her as a muse, believing she offers access to lost vitality. Women may admire her lightness, or envy her ability to defy aging and seriousness. In both cases, her allure conceals the fact that she herself may feel ungrounded, resistant to depth, and disconnected from her own shadow. The vitality she brings, however, is not without cost, for the same charm that draws others to her often keeps her from true intimacy. Her radiance can become a mask that prevents people from seeing her deeper self. She may struggle to maintain the enchantment that others expect, fearing that if the spell breaks, she will be abandoned or unloved. This pressure to remain eternally radiant can create anxiety, even despair, for it denies the natural process of change and maturation. Yet the archetypal energy of the eternal girl cannot be reduced to mere manipulation or vanity. It is part of the psyche's attempt to preserve innocence, wonder, and possibility in a world that so often crushes them. Her charm reminds us of qualities that must not be lost: the ability to delight in life, to resist becoming hardened, to approach the world with openness. These are precious aspects of the human soul, but when charm becomes the central identity, it becomes hollow. Radiance without grounding fades into superficiality, leaving the eternal girl dependent on others' projections rather than her own inner strength. What appears as vitality risks becoming an evasion of depth, a refusal to face the full spectrum of human experience, the suffering, responsibility, and limitations that give meaning to life. In this way, her allure, though captivating, can also be a prison. Beneath the surface of the eternal girl's charm lies a darker truth, one that is rarely acknowledged. The shadow of this archetype manifests as avoidance, resistance, and fear. Fear of responsibility, fear of limitation, fear of the demands of real adulthood. Where her outer light suggests freedom, her inner posture often reveals entrapment, a refusal to confront life in its fullness. This is the shadow side, the hidden costs of clinging to perpetual youth. The eternal girl often struggles to make commitments that endure beyond the initial excitement. Relationships may begin with intensity and enchantment, but when they demand depth, patience, or confrontation, she may retreat. The same pattern appears in her projects and dreams. Beginnings are plentiful, but follow-through is scarce. Life becomes a series of bright starts, each abandoned when it becomes heavy or requires sacrifice. In this way, her shadow is not only a resistance to responsibility, but a subtle sabotage of her own growth. What lies beneath this resistance is a deeper avoidance of limitation. To accept adulthood is to accept boundaries, that time is finite, that choices exclude other possibilities, that loss and suffering are unavoidable. The eternal girl resists these truths, preferring to live in the dreamlike openness of everything is still possible. But this imagined freedom is deceptive, for by refusing to choose, she remains caught in perpetual indecision, unable to ground her life in anything lasting. The shadow also appears in her struggle to embrace suffering. To grow up is to endure pain without escaping into fantasy. Yet the eternal girl often flees discomfort, turning instead toward distraction, escape, or a new beginning. This avoidance may shield her temporarily, but it leaves her vulnerable to fragmentation. Without facing suffering, one cannot build resilience, and without resilience, the psyche remains fragile, dependent on others or on external circumstances to sustain its sense of vitality. This shadow is not malicious, but it is dangerous because it hides beneath her outer radiance. Others may not recognize it, for her charm distracts both herself and those around her from the deeper void. She may convince herself that her refusal to settle down is strength, that her endless beginnings are signs of creativity. But over time, the unacknowledged shadow manifests as restlessness, dissatisfaction, and even despair. The vitality she projects outwardly masks an inner emptiness that grows heavier the longer it is denied. In Jungian thought, shadows demand recognition. To deny them is to let them rule unconsciously. The eternal girl's shadow is precisely this, the refusal to confront reality, the rejection of the limits that give life shape. By avoiding these truths, she condemns herself to superficiality, mistaking charm for depth and youth for wholeness. It is only when this shadow is brought to light, when the fear of limitation is faced directly, that true maturity can begin. Until then, the eternal girl's allure remains haunted by the very darkness she seeks to escape. The roots of the eternal girl archetype are not found merely in vanity or immaturity, but in a much deeper psychological response to life. Very often, this pattern emerges as a defense, a shield against the unbearable weight of existence. When reality feels too demanding, when suffering seems too sharp, when the confrontation with the shadow threatens to overwhelm, the psyche retreats into the archetype of youth. The eternal girl becomes a way of protecting the self from pain. In childhood, innocence serves as a natural refuge. A child does not yet carry the full burden of responsibility or the awareness of mortality. But when the adult psyche clings to this innocence, refusing to step into maturity, it is often because reality has felt too harsh, too threatening, too full of wounds. The eternal girl may have been shaped in early life by overprotection, by neglect, or by trauma. In all cases, her resistance to adulthood is not born of laziness, but of fear. Fear that she cannot withstand the suffering that comes with maturity. This pattern is also reinforced by culture. In a society that idealizes youth, beauty, and innocence, the eternal girl archetype finds fertile ground. A woman may feel validated for remaining playful, spontaneous, uncommitted, while being discouraged from embracing the deeper stages of life that demand sacrifice, responsibility, and confrontation with pain. What is culturally rewarded becomes psychologically reinforced. The eternal girl, then, is not only an inner figure but a projection of society's own fear of aging and death. Yet at its core, this archetype serves a psychic function. It preserves vitality and hope when the individual feels unable to face despair. It creates a fantasy space where possibilities remain endless, where limitations need not be acknowledged, where the soul can breathe in an imagined freedom. In this way, the eternal girl is not simply a weakness but a survival strategy. It protects the psyche from collapse when reality feels intolerable. The problem is that what begins as protection can easily become a prison. The longer one remains within the archetype, the more difficult it becomes to step out. Avoidance of pain does not make pain disappear, it only drives it into the unconscious, where it exerts hidden control. The eternal girl avoids shadow confrontation, but the shadow grows larger in the background. She avoids responsibility, but life's demands return with greater weight. What once shielded her from despair eventually deepens her despair, for the soul longs for wholeness, not escape. Thus, the roots of the eternal girl archetype must be seen with compassion. It is not simply a refusal to grow, but an attempt to preserve the psyche against forces that once felt unbearable. The tragedy lies not in her desire to remain light and innocent, but in her inability to realize that true vitality comes not from evading suffering, but from enduring it and discovering meaning through it. What protected her in the beginning, if left unchecked, becomes the very barrier that prevents her from living a full life. The tragedy of the eternal girl lies not in her innocence or her charm, but in the way her life becomes suspended, perpetually circling around beginnings without ever entering the depths of fulfillment. What at first appears as freedom gradually reveals itself as repetition. She is constantly on the threshold, full of dreams, hopes, and possibilities, yet unable to cross fully into a life of substance. The promise of youth remains, but it is a promise unredeemed, leaving her existence fragmented. Her relationships reflect this tragedy. At first, they sparkle with enchantment. She brings freshness, spontaneity, and a sense of adventure. Partners are drawn into her radiance, imagining that she embodies the key to joy and renewal. Yet, when the relationship demands endurance, sacrifice, or confrontation with flaws, she often withdraws. Depth threatens her illusion of endless beginnings. She may move on to another partner, another romance, convinced that the next one will preserve the enchantment. But this cycle repeats itself, leaving her with a string of unfinished connections and an inner longing that remains unsatisfied. The same pattern unfolds in her personal pursuits. She is often full of ideas, ambitions, and visions for what life could become. She starts projects with passion, throws herself into new adventures with enthusiasm, but when difficulties arise, she loses momentum. To stay committed would mean accepting limits, confronting boredom, enduring setbacks, the very experiences she is determined to avoid, and so she abandons one dream for another, caught in an endless chain of beginnings. The surface shines with activity, but underneath lies a void. Nothing has been carried through to completion. This tragedy is subtle, for on the outside her life may seem vibrant, full of movement and color. She appears alive with possibilities, admired for her energy and lightness. But deep within, there is often a sense of emptiness, even despair. The refusal to mature prevents her from encountering the depths of her own soul. She avoids suffering, but in doing so, she also avoids transformation. She avoids limitation, but she also avoids meaning, for meaning is born only when we commit to something beyond ourselves and endure its trials. The eternal girl's tragedy is amplified by time, for while she clings to youth, life moves forward. Friends, family, and society continue their progression into maturity, while she remains inwardly suspended. What once looked like freedom gradually feels like alienation. she may begin to sense that her life, though full of brightness, lacks coherence, like a story made of fragments without an ending. This realization, when it arrives, can bring immense sorrow, for it reveals how much of life has been left unlived. Her tragedy, then, is not that she is light-hearted or playful. These qualities are valuable, but that her avoidance of maturity robs her of depth. By refusing to embrace the limits of adulthood, she remains in a cycle of perpetual youth, where nothing is ever truly realized. The eternal promise becomes an eternal postponement, leaving her not liberated but trapped in a pattern of unfulfilled beginnings. The eternal girl cannot be understood without recognizing how deeply she is intertwined with society's projections. Culture itself idealizes her, celebrates her, and at times even demands her presence. In many ways, she is not only a psychic pattern within the individual woman, but also an image carried by the collective imagination. From literature and film to advertising and fashion, society holds up the image of the eternally youthful woman, charming, innocent, light-hearted, as the pinnacle of feminine desirability. This makes the archetype both powerful and difficult to escape, for it is continuously reinforced by external mirrors. From an early age, women are taught, often unconsciously, that youth is currency, beauty is equated with vitality, innocence with worth. The eternal girl thus finds herself validated not only by her inner inclination to remain youthful, but by a culture that applauds her refusal to grow old. She is rewarded for her spontaneity, her lightness, her refusal to be burdened by responsibility. The collective fantasy is that such a woman will forever remain radiant, untouched by the gravity of time. In this way, society itself conspires to keep her trapped in the archetype. The effect of this projection is profound. On the one hand, it grants the eternal girl a kind of power. She embodies what others unconsciously desire: freedom from age, freedom from mortality, freedom from the heavy demands of adulthood. Men may idealize her as a muse, seeing in her the restoration of their own lost youth. Women may envy or admire her, measuring themselves against the cultural fantasy she represents. But this admiration is double-edged, for while she is celebrated, she is also imprisoned by the very expectations that elevate her. The eternal girl becomes caught in a paradox. She cannot let go of youth, for it is the source of her recognition. To mature would mean to risk invisibility, to lose the admiration and validation that come from embodying the collective fantasy. And so, she often clings to the persona of the eternal girl, even when it no longer serves her inner growth. This creates a deep conflict between her authentic self and the image that others expect her to maintain. What is important to see is that the cultural projection is not just personal. It is symbolic. Society worships the eternal girl because it fears aging, limitation, and death. By idealizing her, culture preserves the illusion that innocence and beauty can be eternal. She becomes a vessel for society's denial of mortality, carrying the impossible expectation of staying forever young. But no human being can bear such a projection without suffering. Eventually, the weight of maintaining the fantasy becomes too heavy, leaving the eternal girl torn between the image she projects and the reality she lives. In this way, the eternal girl archetype is not only an inner defense, but also a reflection of society's collective shadow. She is celebrated for embodying qualities that the culture secretly fears to lose, and in turn, she is prevented from embracing her own deeper growth. What appears to be admiration is, in truth, a subtle form of imprisonment, binding her to a role that denies her wholeness. The path beyond the eternal girl archetype is not found in rejecting her altogether, but in integrating her gifts into a fuller, more mature self. The vitality, spontaneity, and lightness she embodies are not weaknesses. They are qualities of the soul that must be preserved. What must change is their place within the psyche. Instead of dominating her life and keeping her suspended in perpetual adolescence, these qualities can become companions to a deeper sense of responsibility, wisdom, and groundedness. To move beyond the eternal girl, she must face what she has long avoided: limitation, suffering, and mortality, This confrontation is not a punishment, but a passage. It is only by acknowledging the finiteness of time that one begins to live authentically. When she accepts that not every possibility can be pursued, she learns the value of choice. Commitment ceases to feel like imprisonment and becomes instead the gateway to meaning. Through limitation, life gains shape. Through responsibility, it gains depth. The process of integration requires courage, for it demands the breaking of illusions. The eternal girl must let go of the fantasy of endless beginnings, the dream of perpetual youth. She must risk disillusionment in order to discover truth. Yet in doing so, she does not lose vitality. Rather, she roots it in reality. Her spontaneity becomes more than escape. It becomes the spark that enlivens enduring commitments. Her playfulness ceases to be a mask. It becomes a source of renewal within the seriousness of life. This transformation also involves reclaiming the shadow, the very fears she has avoided. Fear of pain, of limitation, of aging, must be brought into consciousness. By confronting them directly, she discovers that they are not insurmountable. Suffering, when faced, reveals resilience. Limitation, when accepted, reveals direction. Aging, when embraced, reveals depth and authenticity. In this way, the eternal girl learns that the qualities she once fled from are precisely those that open the door to wholeness. Jung would say that the task is individuation, the movement toward becoming a whole self rather than a partial image. The eternal girl archetype is only one fragment of the psyche, beautiful yet incomplete. To remain in her thrall is to deny the fullness of life. To integrate her is to bring balance, where youthful vitality coexists with mature wisdom and innocence lives alongside depth. This does not mean abandoning joy but deepening it, allowing it to be grounded in reality rather than floating above it. In this way, the eternal girl becomes transformed. She is no longer a figure of avoidance, trapped in perpetual beginnings, but a source of vitality within a life that has meaning. Her charm remains, but it is no longer hollow. It is enriched by depth, by the wisdom of suffering endured, by the authenticity of a self that has embraced both youth and maturity. This is her redemption, not to escape time, but to live within it fully, carrying her light into the depths of existence rather than hovering forever on its surface.